We have the parts 1 through 3 homework due tonight, so don't forget about that. And even though we're more or less finishing up the module today, we still have Monday to review and prepare for the exam on Tuesday. Okay, so what were we up to last time? There really weren't too many different questions in parts 1 and 2, but I wanted to go over some of them briefly, just to remind you of how some things work. For example, on or in part 1, there were some review questions about correlation coefficients. So just to remind you how that works, that's this choral function where we're highlighting two different columns. The things we're comparing would be the price and quantity. Make sure you do not grab the headers because then you'll grab everything between rows 21 and 352, and we don't want that. So that's all there is to find the correlation coefficient. Type choral, put some columns in with a comma in between. What else was in there? In part 2, question 2, it was essentially trying to teach you how to use this calculator. So I wanted to walk through some of the features that were already built here that the question was trying to describe, but just in case you didn't understand the point. So when you're looking at this spreadsheet, this guy up here in the top left is sort of a model for our data. So that line, that slope and intercept, is what we're using to predict or to make predictions about how much OJ will sell at certain prices. And these two numbers up here are going to change throughout the module just depending on the question. This little section underneath that are just a few different estimated quantities sold for a few different prices. But usually if you want to look up estimated quantity for a specific price, it's easier to find it here than skimming for a particular price down here. Also, this is raw data down here. You don't ever really want to change this because it's hard to remember what it used to be. These numbers are nice round numbers that you can change to be whatever you like in case there's a question like, well, what if the price is $1.25? Well, there we go. There's that number right there. And it's really easy to change this back because it's clearly 50-cent intervals. What else is going on in this spreadsheet? Well, this line, not only is it influencing all of these estimated quantities, it's also the red line on our graph. So we can sort of see how, as we change our model, how this particular line moves around. And so when we have questions like part 2, question B, where it says literally just guess and check to find the line of best fit, what they were expecting you to do with this red line is manipulate these two cells until you think the line fits the data well. So for example, I maybe think, well, I could lower it so it's more near this cluster. So I could lower this guy down, but now it's too severe. So I could mess with the slope. Now it's too high again. And maybe mess with the slope one more time. I don't know. It's guess and check. That's a reasonable guess for this question. I just wanted to show you the point of this question was to make you understand that if you manipulate this guy over here, it'll change this line. And that's one of our main ideas later in this question. Then down below, what's going on down here, like I mentioned earlier, this guy is our raw data. So this is what was actually recorded at these 80-some stores for particular weeks. And so each pair is one XY coordinate. So these two columns represent the blue dots up here. This column is our estimated quantity sold. So if we take the same exact price and we plug it in to our model, this is what we were estimating we would sell. And the reason I wanted to point that out is because then there's a question that asks you, whoops, wrong way. That asks you, okay, well, what does this thing represent over to the side then? It's the difference between these two squared. It's essentially how far off our estimate was. So this column is sort of a nice way to gauge how well we're doing. How close was our model to what actually occurred? And in terms of our graph, since these are our blue dots and this is our red line and this is the difference between them, You can also think of this number over here as how far away that one dot is from the line, which then leads me to this guy, the final thing in our graph, which uses this weird function that you do not need to know how to do, but I can teach you if you like. But this, all that is the sum of all these numbers over here. So what that means is that this is a single number that represents how far away the points are. So the smaller this number is, the better our model is. It's saying, oh, the points are really close to that red line that we're utilizing, which is why when you have some questions that want you to find the line of best fit, typically what you're going to be doing is trying to minimize this number here. Because by minimizing this distance, you're saying make the points as close as possible. And that's how we're going to get our line of best fit. So just a quick review of how that works. After you run through the setup for Solver, you should have a button on the data tab. This guy here, C8, we are trying to minimize by changing our model, which is these two values. You want to make sure this box is unchecked. Hit solve. It does its thing. That's the best model. That's as small as it's going to get, which is still a massive number, but that's because we're in the tens of thousands. And so when you start squaring stuff, it gets really big. So there's our line of best fit over there. And don't forget, whenever you change this filter, you're going to get a different line of best fit because this line is only for these specific blue dots. So if you change the blue dots, it has a different line of best fit. Okay, what are we up to today? So in part 3, specifically question 4, it's going to introduce 2 new ways to find the line of best fit. So we already know Solver, but it's going to introduce these 2 ways. And I want to talk about them real quick because they're actually really useful. This is not just 3 different ways to do the exact same thing. These 2 other methods have features that Solver doesn't have. So I wanted to talk about those. So first thing I want to talk about is how to set up this trend line. So I'm going to follow these steps here. Basically, whoops, I already had it over here. What we're going to do is click on our graph, and up at the top of the screen, after you click on the graph, you get these 2 new tabs. We are going to be looking for chart design. And then within this ribbon, all the way left says add chart element. We're going to click that and scroll down to trend line. And specifically, we want a linear trend line because we want a line, not a parabola or something. And then it asks, okay, well, which set of data do you want to do this for? We want to do it for series 1 because series 1 represents these blue dots. After I hit OK, it's going to add a second line to our graph. And basically what's going on is this black line, our trend line, is always the line of best fit, which means if I run Solver, oh, that's annoying, these 2 lines are going to overlap. And so this is a nice feature of why I like to always have a trend line, because if you have a question that says you better make sure you're using the line of best fit and you look at your picture and these lines are not overlapping, you see 2 lines, that means your calculator is currently not using the line of best fit. So it's a nice like warning flag. Another thing that's kind of nice is if Solver breaks, Solver is super buggy and sometimes your computer won't do it correctly. If you double click that little line we just added, there's a box to display the equation on the graph that we can then add. It puts it in the worst possible spot. So I'm going to move it up here. This equation is always the line of best fit. So if Solver doesn't work, you can just type those numbers in over here, which is kind of cool. Also, let's see what happens when I go to Minute Maid. So I'm going to change my filter to Minute Maid. All my blue dots are going to move. That trend line automatically updated. This equation automatically updated. So that's something that Trendline does that Solver doesn't. It will always correct itself to find the line of best fit for the data that you're currently looking at. So it's a nice feature to have in your spreadsheet that I would suggest adding. Little trend line to that guy. Okay, third guy. Third guy is sort of a way to manually find this without invoking solver, and it's pretty simple. You type equals slope somewhere, and then it asks you for y's and x's. These quantity solds are our y's. These prices are our x's. And there we go. Check it out. This guy found the exact same thing that our trend line did. You can do the same trick with the intercept function. Quantities, prices, and there we go. So it finds these values exactly. The advantage here is it's more precise than solver. Solver's kind of like goal-seek, where it's kind of guessing and checking, so it might not find the exact value. So that's one benefit of this. But in solver's defense, these questions will always be multiple choice, so you don't have to be super precise. Another benefit, which is the real reason I wanted to talk about this, is remember this question from part 2, question 1? You got these 2 points. Find the equation of the line that goes through these 2 points. You can just use slope and intercept to find the equation of a line through 2 points, because the equation of a line through 2 points happens to be the line of best fit for those 2 points. So it's a nice little additional thing you can use these 2 functions, slope and intercept, for if you just want to find the equation of a line through 2 values. Okay, what else is going on today? In part 4, we're finally going to be adding some like columns over here, some actual, calculations we have to drag, and you're going to add another graph to the spreadsheet, and these have to do with profit. The thing I wanted to point out is you always want to clear your filter so you can see all the data before you start adding things. Here's why. If I add a little formula over here, for profit, and I drag it down and I have it for Trop Store 5, and then I go, oh, okay, well now I want it for Minute Maid. Ah, shit, it all disappeared. I have to start completely over every single time I have a new question. It's a horrible way to do this. So what you actually want to do is make sure that we can see everything in the filter. You can either hit select all, or you can hit this little clear button, which does the same thing. But notice, there's not a filter on these columns anymore. It's going all the way down. Well, I deleted some of my data to make it smaller. Maybe I didn't. But anyway, make sure you clear that so you can see everything before you start making columns over here and before you make this graph. Because if you don't, you're going to have to start from scratch every single time, which is kind of sucky. It takes a lot more time. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing I wanted to mention is you're not just building this completely from scratch. In the workbook, it gives you the formulas for these things you're building. So it's not too bad. Price is already there. Quantity sold is already there. This is the only new feature, cost. And the cost can change. Sometimes it's 90 cents, sometimes it's 80 cents. So the last thing I want to mention is when you're building this column and you're trying to drag it all the way down for 30,000 some odd rows, what I like to do is make a little cost cell up here and just reference this. And then if it changes, I just change this guy and the whole column changes. I don't have to have some crazy if statement where it's saying, if Tropicana, use 80 cents. If it's Minute Maid, use a different one. If it's a homework question, it's another different one. So I like to add a little box up here and then use that for my entire column. Even though all like the Minute Maids will be wrong temporarily, you're never going to be displaying Tropicana and Minute Maid at the same time anyway. So you can always change this and it will be correct for the ones you're looking at. So